My first question kind of has to do with an age-old debate, one that happens essentially every 4 years, but I think that this election cycle, it has some increased importance based on what is happening in Israel and Palestine, and obviously the role of the Joe Biden administration in these war crimes and this genocide. So I guess I'll just lay out this question. I'm really interested in your thoughts on it. Going into 2024, as I see it on the left, kind of two camps have developed. Those who feel that Joe Biden is still clearly the lesser of two evils, and that however horrific the war crimes that he has greenlit, they think that Donald Trump would oversee the same level of horror abroad and perhaps far worse domestically. And then there's the camp that believes that Joe Biden and his foreign policy represents such a grave evil that it simply cannot be signed off on from a leftist perspective. And therefore, it is essential to support a leftist third party option, someone like Dr. Cornel West or Dr. Jill Stein. And normally, Zach and I are huge advocates of voting for third party candidates. I voted for Dr. Stein in 2016 and Howie Hawkins as a Green Party candidate in 2020. But to be honest, Professor Finkelstein, this election cycle, I think that Zach and I have both kind of concluded that the third party movement is particularly unorganized, with Dr. Cornel West having left the Green Party to go independent, which really puts his ballot access in jeopardy. Dr. Jill Stein taking over his place as the presumptive Green Party nominee, and also Claudia de la Cruz running as a candidate with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. With all of these candidates running and no clear pathway to a 5% voting threshold, let alone a victory, I'm wondering what your opinion on the state of the third party movement is right now, and more broadly, what your advice is for the left going into 2024 electorally.
Well, I want to begin by saying I'm not one of those people who carries on as if all the arguments are on one side and there are no arguments on the other side. I think in most political issues, you have to weigh the arguments and decide on which side you come down. So I'm not oblivious to any of your considerations, and I frankly have to say that they often, inside of me, I wrestle with them, and I'm sometimes torn. I have to recognize that Trump, I think Cornel West actually found the right formulation. Trump risks a nuclear war. Biden risks a nuclear war. Trump risks a civil war. And I think those are both correct. The path that Biden has set us on, even though now China has been moved to a back burner because of Ukraine and Israel, the trajectory is towards nuclear war, and we have to take that very seriously. But on the other hand, Trump is risking a civil war. I have to add to that it's the Democratic Party now who's risking the civil war, because whether you like it or not, about half the electorate wants Trump to win. Probably a little more than half at this moment, wants Trump to win. If you deny Trump the right to run for office, half of our electorate is going to see that, experience that, conceive it as they have been disenfranchised. They have lost the right to vote for the candidate that they want. Now, I don't want to get too dramatic about it. I don't want to turn it into something theatrical, but to my thinking, that could set off a civil war when half the population is of the opinion that it has been disenfranchised. It has been denied the right of franchise to vote for the candidate of their choosing. So even though I agree with Dr. Cornel West that should Trump be elected, there's a real chance he will foment a civil war. I think it's also true to say at this particular moment in time, it's the Democratic Party that's fomenting the civil war. Now, there is the obvious argument to be made that if Trump broke the law, then he has to be held accountable. And of the various claims about him breaking the law, obviously the one that looms largest, it's not the only one, but the one that looms largest is what happened on January 6th. Now, January 6th is not what you would call a technical issue. It's not particle physics. It's not astrophysics. It's something that any person can reach a judgment on based on his or her observance of what happened. So, do we really need, in this instance, a court to decide whether what happened on January 6th was an insurrection? Everybody understands the word insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the government. That's not complicated. Everybody who wants to saw what happened on January 6th. And everybody can, using his or her own judgment, decide whether what happened on January 6th constitutes an insurrection. That's not a complicated issue of law. Sure, the justices are going to go through all the dictionaries and all the precedents to discuss what insurrection means, but with all due regard to the rule of law, I really think that's gratuitous. Any person can reach his or her judgment on that question. And so far as we can tell, at least half the electorate does not believe that what happened on January 6th rose to the threshold of an insurrection. If you don't agree with that, then I have to say I'm a believer in democracy. You have to persuade that 50%. You have to persuade them that it was an insurrection. But you can't use that as a pretext to deny half the population of its right to choose its candidate for president. And you can't claim that this issue, this legal issue, is too complex or complicated for a lay person to understand. No, it is not. You don't need a judge reading all of the relevant law to a jury. It either was or wasn't, it could be borderline. It either was or wasn't a call to overthrow the government. Now, you guys might believe it was, that effectively that's what happened on January 6th. And you're entitled to your opinion. But I cannot see how you could be entitled to impose your opinion on half the electorate and tell them they can't vote for who they choose to vote, who they would choose to vote. That's one aspect. You asked me the second aspect about the third parties. I think it's still premature. I understand the countdown has begun. We've passed New Year's, and the countdown has begun. But I do know Dr. West, and I would say, Dr. West knows everybody. So to say Dr. West is like saying there's a grain of sand in the beach. It's not a great, it's not a particularly unique honor. However, I have talked to him, and I've been on shared the stage with him where I raised the issue. My view is, in my opinion, I told Dr. West, you should treat your constituents like adults. There should be no tricks, no patronizing, no condescending. And my view is, let's see how much momentum he can gather. The more momentum he can gather, the more leverage he has with Biden. Come October, he can then just assess. He could say all the polls show I'm not going to do better than 20%. That's the max. And therefore, I will put an ultimatum to Biden. You want my votes? You want me to endorse you? You have to do A, B, C, and D. But these will be non-negotiable demands. You have to do it. In my view, he should take demands which are very popular with the Democratic Party as it is, and say, demand number one. Let's take demand number one. You have to free Julian Assange. You have to end the prosecution of Julian Assange. No ifs, ands, or buts. And you have to cancel that student debt. Because I know many young people, many young people, probably for a person my age, I know more young people than anyone else my age. And every single person I talk to, in the course of a conversation, student debt comes up. Every conversation I have, that student, that millstone around the necks of young people. Now, when I went to school, nobody had student debt. No one. Everything was free. Everything was free. City University was free. State University, there was a nominal tuition, but you got what were called in New York State Regent scholarships, which virtually everyone got. It covered the tuition. Private schools, if you had, if you were not of a middle class income, they paid for it. Everything was free, and it's wrong. It's unfair for this generation to deny young people the opportunities that we had. We never had to go through. Like, I'll tell you, again, I'm talking about a long time ago, guys. When you had, some people did take out loans. Some people took out federal loans. And you know what happened? Remember, this is before all the computers and all that stuff that can trace your credit and trace everything. People just defaulted on their loan. The government did absolutely nothing. No, I'm serious. The government did absolutely nothing. People just defaulted. It didn't affect, there was no such thing in my era of a credit rating. That didn't exist. It was just the era where credit cards are beginning. So there was no student debt. So number one, free Julian Assange, or free him from threat of prosecution. Number two, cancel student debt. You could say the number three, to bring up that Medicare for all again. Everything that's popular with the Democratic Party base. And then if Biden says no, then the burden is on him. It's not Cornel West who cost him the election. He cost himself the election because the demands were reasonable and they were popular, overwhelmingly popular with his base. So my advice, not that Cornel West is necessarily agreeing with me, and he may disagree, but in my view, everybody, including yourselves, should say you're voting for Cornel West. That increases his leverage. That he has he's got 20%. And use that as leverage with Biden, and then present Biden with the non-negotiable demands. Now I know you guys are thinking, well, of course Biden's going to say yes and then he'll do nothing because that's Biden. That's how our system works. But that's not, in my opinion, correct. That was the problem with Bernie Sanders' candidacy. Bernie Sanders, the moment he endorsed Biden, he dropped everything. He dropped the ball. He could have, after the election, did exactly what he said he would do. Remember what Bernie said? Because people constantly asked him, Bernie, how are you going to get your legislation through Congress? How are you going to do it? And he kept saying, of course I can't get it through unless I have people on the street. But after Biden's election, he no longer sang that tune. He made a choice. He decided it's better to have Biden's left ear behind closed doors than to call out the troops. Because he knew that if he called out the troops and there were 1 million young people surrounding the White House, Biden would say, bye-bye, Bernie. No left ear, no right ear, get the hell out of here. So, but Cornel West has that option. He could call out the troops and say, Biden made a promise. He broke his promise. Surround the White House, engage in sit-ins, get arrested, just like the civil rights movement. We are getting what we were promised. Bernie, unfortunately, did not do that. But that option was open then, and the option is open now. So my view is maximize the support for Cornel West, let him leverage it in negotiations with Biden. If he comes back and says, I'm not voting for Biden, I'm not going to tell people to vote for Biden, you guys could still vote for Biden. Nobody stops you. It's not as if you have to sign over your vote to Cornel West. Nobody's asking you to do that. What's being asked at this point is give him the leverage. And we'll see what happens now. West may not agree. He said he's going through to the end. And I told him I don't believe that's a correct thing to say. Among friends, or as he says, among brothers. I said, I don't think that's a correct thing to say, because you have to give yourself space to maneuver. You should be honest with people. Promise to vote to me, give me the leverage, and let's see what I can get. And if I can't get it, then if you want, vote for Biden. That's up to you. But I'm totally against these naysayers who from the get-go say, we're not going to vote for him. Why are you doing that now? At least give him some leverage.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that now? I don't get that at all. And so I was very angry when, at least originally, when Ralph Nader said he wouldn't support Cornel. And I know one of Nader's key people. I wrote a very angry email, probably ended the friendship with him, but I was so angry about that. Why are you doing that now? Let's see what he can do. Let's see what he can do. I've talked to him because the campaign seems to have slowed down. The momentum has clearly slowed down. And he seems to have a strategy. He says he doesn't want it to peak too early. So he's waiting before the push. I think he said 6 months before. I could be wrong. I don't know him well. I know we communicate and we've met, but I would not claim to be one of his close brothers. So that's where I stand.